There's no rule about what you're allowed to feel. If you feel guilt, if you feel grief, resentment, all of those things, I want to invite you to explore it.
You just lost your loved one. Now what? Welcome to the Grief in Life podcast, where we explore this new reality through grief-colored lenses. Openly, authentically, I'm your host, Nina Rodriguez. Let's get started.
Hello, and welcome back to the Grief and Light podcast. My name is Nina, and I'm your host. What if the mess that you've been avoiding is actually the doorway? Today's guest believes that creativity is not just a coping tool, it's a life philosophy. She's a transformational creativity and grief coach who has built a judgment-free space where people are invited to feel everything and make something from it. There are no rules, there's no fixed outcomes, just the act of picking up art supplies and holding space for our truth to emerge through them. She holds degrees and certifications in fine arts, education, person-centered expressive arts, and grief counseling, and she brings all of that into one-on-one coaching and intimate small group deep dives, both in person and online. Her work lives at the intersection of mess and meaning, and she'll tell you that the messiness of life is exactly what we are here for. Susie, welcome to the Grief and Light podcast.
Thank you, Nina. That was sort of nice to hear you read that.
Well, it's so true, and it is true to the work that you do. It's in that messy middle that bringing the beauty out of some life-altering experiences and confusing experiences. So before we get started with your story, I'd like to get your thoughts on why creativity is such a powerful companion, response, antidote to grief, in your opinion.
Think the main thing is that the words we use they'll get us somewhere. Talking about grief is important. We want to have people that we can talk about it with. But a lot of times what we're experiencing, what we're feeling is so much bigger than words. Like there are words that we just can't find to express the feeling in our hearts, in our bodies. And so creativity gives us another way to explore it, or actually ways, because there's so many different avenues you can go down in creativity. But if we're just talking visual arts, color expresses something. If you just think about a palette of colors, a cool, dark blue or black or red or a soft, buttery yellow, I mean, all of them actually conjure up very different emotions for us. And so when we use those to express, it goes to a place that, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. There's a reason it's a cliche because it has truth in it. And so I think that what I've found anyway is that using creativity gives us a way to explore what's going on in our hearts and then express what's going on, and to the point where we feel lighter because we did that. We created something from those feelings and with those different materials.
Absolutely. And what would you say to somebody that thinks, I'm not a creative person, like, it's not my thing, it's not for me? What would you say to that person?
Well, you've come to the right place is the first thing I say. Because first of all, I just believe everyone's creative, and those of us who feel that we aren't, generally speaking, that comes from some wound, someone who told us that early on in our lives, and we unfortunately believed it, and we're scarred by that narrative, and we've carried that with us. So I would say everyone is creative, and creativity does not mean being an artist. So I think one thing that happens is people make a connection between a creative person is an artist who does something that's beautiful and should go up on a wall and should match my couch or should be in a museum and an art gallery, and they make a lot of money. And like none of those things are true in terms of being creative. Everyone's creative. You're creative when you cook dinner. You're creative when you dress yourself in the morning. You're creative how you decorate your house or when you write a note to someone. So what I tell people is, if you come to me to do some work, but you feel resistance because you feel like, well, I'm not really creative, then I want you to know what we do together is not about making anything that's art. It's just using the materials, the art supplies, to express. It's not about making a work of art. If it unlocks something and then you find yourself desiring that, go for it. But that's not my purpose in working with people.
Thank you so much for that distinction because I do agree when we associate creativity with artists and people who maybe haven't explored their own creativity, they don't associate themselves with either. And that is important to say, the point of creativity is to create and to unearth. And we use these tools to do that, to unearth what's wanting to be said, expressed, what wants to come out, that truth that maybe our minds and, like you said, words are not ready to express quite yet. So that's a beautiful means to getting there. But before we talk about how you get there, where did you first get acquainted with grief and how has that yielded over time through to the person that I'm speaking with today?
Mm, Honestly, I think my first memory of grief is losing someone who was like my grandfather. He was called Uncle Harry, and he was actually someone that my grandfather sort of adopted. They were adults. It was during the Depression, and Harry didn't have a family, and he ended up coming home and living with my grandparents, helping raise my mother, and he was still there when I was born and lived with my mom and my dad for a while, and he died when I was 10, and it was a huge loss. So, I would say that that was my very first memory, and I never shied away from mourning him. I just held him in my heart. I always have, and I named my first child after him. So, when it wasn't quite popular yet, Harry Potter hadn't come out yet. And then in my own adult life, I explored and experienced grief myself in two major stories. One it was my middle son had some very severe medical issues that started when he was about 8. He was diagnosed with a neurological condition and had to have pretty immediate brain surgery, and there were all sorts of complications. And it led to years and years of surgeries that were actually orthopedic surgeries, ending when he was just about 16 and he had his final surgery. But he had 15 surgeries during that time. And it was really a grief journey for me. It was a grief journey for him as well. But for me, as his mom, and I know that you've talked to so many parents on your podcast, so people definitely have heard this. When you walk alongside your child who's going through traumatic medical experiences, you have a life of grief. You grieve the carefree child you had before that, and you grieve what the future might hold for them or yourself, and you're also the rest of your family. And I was just grieving the fact that he had to have these painful experiences. It was very hard. He's fine now. He's 28, and, but I do think uh, it definitely affected his life in a huge way, which I think he's actually not even grappled with yet. And then, the other part of my story is that I came out of the closet when I was 56 after 29 years of marriage and to a wonderful, loving person who I'm still very close to. I call him my husband. Um, and we're good friends. We're really good friends. He's family for sure. But it was very much a story of grief for me as well, because as much as ultimately knew I needed to acknowledge who I really was, which was a truth that I had really not been aware of earlier in my life, it meant deconstructing this beautiful life I had actually very intentionally created. And so there was a lot of grief and fear that held me back and that accompanied me along that journey. And I actually remember I had an art studio at the time when I came out. I had had it for like 5 years, and I remember one night driving to my studio crying because I was so filled with grief, and I sort of felt like, "Okay, grief," like grief was sitting there in the passenger seat next to me, like, "Why? Why do I have to do this? Why?" And grief was sort of like, because this is your truth. This is your truth that you have to go through this. You have to push outside of your comfort zone, to find joy and to find truth. And that was, yeah, I still remember that. It just really felt like grief was right there with me that day.
Well, thank you. I want to unpack so much of that because you mentioned three types of moments that define grief for you. So it's a loss of Harry and this meaningful person in your life. And obviously you were young. So there's that the people in our early years inform our personality and our understanding of the world. And it sounds like Harry was very special. So honoring him through our conversation today. Obviously, your son, that is, I don't have children, but I hold these conversations in a very special place in my heart where parents grieve the life they thought they would have with their child.
Yes.
Perhaps it's because I saw my parents grieving my brother's life when they realized he struggled with addiction and what this means for the life they thought they would have with him. And I saw it as the daughter, right? So witnessing all of it kind of from this other perspective. So it really is something that touches my heart. And I thank you for sharing that because it is an important exploration of the many ways that we grieve, even if any non death related ways. So that anticipatory grief, living with the unknown. And then the third one is your identity shift. I feel like identity is such a huge part of why we grieve in every context. So, more so when it's conflicting with our beliefs and our understanding of who we thought we were and then being honest about who we are and holy crap, like we have to make so many life changes that are going to impact, I don't know, everybody in our lives. So that there's a lot there. Absolutely. So, what role did art play in all of this? And was that how you discovered, for example, when you told your husband, did art play a role in any of that? If so, how did it?
Well, yeah, actually, the practice that I teach people is called art journaling, and it's mixed media in a sketchbook. It's not about making art that you hang on the wall at all. It's really this very private journal that when you're done, you put it up on the shelf, and it's just as private as a diary, really. And I actually was called to it when my son was going through his medical stuff. So that was when I discovered it. That's when I started to explore it for myself. And after a few years of doing it just for myself, to really, it just felt like to acknowledge and release all this stuff that I was holding, all these feelings, and recognizing this incredible catharsis that I had every single time. And it was fun also to do something fun and creative with my pain was a little mind bending. So that was fantastic. And I became truly obsessed with it. And so then a couple years into it was when I decided I wanted to teach other people how to do it because I thought this is such a powerful thing to be able to do for yourself. And you don't need a lot of fancy art supplies or to know how to even use them. You know that you can, if you have some old art supplies, you can just do this super basic practice, but it goes to such a deep place. So that was what led me to my work. And then when I came out of the closet, like 4 years after I had started my business and my coaching and teaching, I, um, I art journaled constantly. I have 7 art journals of what I call my coming out art journals that are about, just the whole exploration from the very first moments to, today. I think I every so often I'll do one in there now, but I'm sort of back to just regular emotional stuff that I have to deal with, um, but my coming out journals are my most precious journals. The way I explored and expressed my story gives me so much satisfaction to go back and look at and spend time with. And when I was coming out, many times I would bring a journal or two with me to have the conversation with someone, to share with them, because it showed them in a way that was not just talking about this story, the depths of my experience, my exhilaration, my fear, my grief, my joy, the beauty of being true to myself, all of it. And also my fear of like, I one of the fears I had was that I would just lose everyone, including my kids. And so it was powerful for people to see the imagery and some of the words that came through.
I think it's safe to say that maybe those journals know a level of honesty that maybe the rest of the world doesn't. And
Mhm.
that's sometimes their power. It reminds me of, how we often say in grief work that grief needs an empathetic witness. And for a lot of people, feelings are hard in general, like processing, expressing. Many of us don't even have tools, especially at the beginning, words for what we're feeling, etc. So, what I find fascinating about a journaling practice, whether it's through art, writing, however, whatever type of journaling you do, is that you are your own empathetic witness and
Yes.
in a way, in a space that feels safe. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, 100%, 100%. And one of the foundational principles in my work is validate yourself. And we are conditioned now, really hugely conditioned by social media to seek validation from other people. And I think it's a natural desire to get validation from a parent or a teacher, someone or a friend. But we're at a level now where we need so much validation because of social media. And so I want people to pull it back and own the validation for themselves. You don't need anyone else. And witnessing is a huge part of the work I do, whether it's witnessing yourself or having me be your witness, or in any of my group programs, we witness each other. And it's intrinsic to the whole process, and a very powerful transformative element of feeling connected and feeling um, that release and honoring of the feelings. I think honoring your feelings is really such an important part of the grief journey, especially when you live in a culture that doesn't want you to ever feel grief or acknowledge it. It's too scary. It's, hands off.
Would you
So
say the honoring is in the act of expression or more beyond that? I'm curious.
it's, I think it's both the act of expression, absolutely, and also the sharing of your story with others and being witnessed. So being held in that. So it's sort of those three elements of it that's the honoring of the whole thing.
And vulnerability can feel so threatening for people, for many people in different contexts. We all have a different threshold and a different level of tolerance. Like you said, one of your biggest fears was losing your loved ones in terms of connection because you don't know how they're going to respond. So, speak to both things. Like in your personal lived experience, when you said, "I'm going to come out, I'm going to say it for what it is, and I'm going to share my truth with my family." What was the reaction? Was it expected, unexpected? What were things that were supportive to you? And then parallel to that, this is like a layered question. How do you create a sense of safety for the people that you work with in the spaces that you work with for them to come undone and be vulnerable?
Mm. Well, for my own story, when I came out, no, it was not expected. Nobody, nobody expected it. My husband did. I'd been sort of talking to him about it in obtuse terms for a while, and so it didn't go the way he thought it would go, but for him it wasn't totally unexpected, but for every other person it was. And that was very, very hard, and I just had to tell them the truth and then be as patient as I could be with their reactions. My kids what I found with my kids actually was that they were in their is when I came out, and for them, their world was so fluid, gender, sexuality-wise, that for them, that wasn't really that exciting or interesting, not, you know, the ultimate concern that their parents were gonna split up, that they didn't. They
Which
were
is
afraid.
understandable, yeah.
Of
And
course,
when I said expected, I meant more like the reaction that you expected from them. Was it kind of what you expected from them?
think I tried to not go in with expectations with
Just
them.
open.
They were I think it wasn't what I expected. They were actually pretty, vulnerable themselves and very sensitive for both me and my husband. Yeah, our middle son, the one I had mentioned before, he actually said to his dad, "You always put everyone else first. I want you to promise you'll take care of yourself." And that was just, like, getting to
Wow.
see my child, who was 21, be a real mensch, like a grown-up, caring person. That was amazing. Anyway, my mother had a completely unexpected response. She was just really upset and furious, and we went down to see her, to tell her, and she held it against me for a really long time that I had told her in person because she felt put on the spot. She was so shocked, and, it took a long time, and my having a bit more vulnerability and curiosity about what her problem with me was with all of that, um but yeah, it I think, coming out of the closet, first of all, you don't just do it once, you do it many, many times throughout your life, and, when you're someone who no one ever thought, like, my husband and I were the power couple at our synagogue and in our friend community and our family, and no, I had always dated boys. Nobody had a clue. I didn't have a clue. That's what I kept telling them. They kept saying, "I don't understand." I was like, I said, "What do you think I feel like?" I don't get this either, but I'm finally recognizing it. So anyway, I definitely just had to learn how to be patient with people because it took them time and they also grieved. I mean, let's talk about grief. Like, my whole entire family was grieving about us splitting up. And my mother was worrying about me and my future and all these different things. But it wasn't exactly the celebration I was sort of hoping people would have. Not then anyway. But I did get married. I did get married this past April, and
Congratulations,
I
yes.
did. I met my
Last year.
love. Yes, this last year in 2025.
Congratulations.
Thank you, and it was such a circling around and a healing of that grief because my children were there with just smiles from ear to ear, holding us in their love. My mother was there, everyone danced, everyone celebrated. My husband was there too, honestly. It was really a beautiful celebration, so to me, that was also just a real testament to you get to move through these painful times of your life and create the life you want. You just have to sort of believe that it's possible. You don't have to do it the way somebody else says you have to. So anyway, that's that. But talking about how do I create space for vulnerability in my work with my clients? Uh, it's the number one thing for me is that people feel safe to have the emotions they have. So in my introduction, you mentioned a judgment-free zone. And so the way I create a judgment-free zone is I tell people my own story in my lead up to our conversations. First of all, before I even talk to a potential client, they get to learn about my own story. And I make space for crying. And in every program I ever teach, whether it's one on one or small groups, I address crying as something to celebrate, a natural expression of emotion. And that I teach people how to behave when someone in the group cries. Francis Weller, who's a grief educator, yes, he's amazing. He talks about crying and how if you touch someone when they're crying, it shuts down their vulnerability and it closes them off. And we generally reach out and fawn, it's actually fawning over someone to reassure them that they're not alone from our own space of discomfort with their emotion. So I teach people that we don't do that. And it's not just teaching the people who are the witnesses, it's also teaching the person who's crying, who may actually expect people to reach out and take care of them. But what I basically say is, when you cry, we will hold you with our hearts in the space, but we will not offer you Kleenex and we will not touch you. And so the Kleenex is always there. I have Kleenex everywhere in my studio. And you don't have to apologize for crying, which is something people almost always do. Just cry. Cry as much as you want, and we're here for you. And we will let you cry. And when, afterwards we may say, "Would you like a hug?" And maybe we'd give you, we'll give you one if you want one, but we're not going to interrupt you in any way. And so I think the fact is that I name it at the very, very beginning of every program. And so people really get that it is completely okay. And then I also talk a lot about the fact that our work that we're doing is not about making something beautiful at all. It's about being raw. It's about being uh, even confused and not knowing what it is, but being true, following our intuition and just going with whatever says to you, use me, do this, put this there. You don't even have to understand what it is that you've created, and that's fine. And it doesn't have to be balanced or cohesive or symmetrical or anything that would be a term that you'd hear like in an art critique. We're not doing a critique. We're witnessing whatever came through and honoring that with you.
Thank you for sharing and going in depth there because it sounds like consent is such a key
Yes.
element here. And if you said, "Would you like a hug?" You end with, "Would you like a hug?" Because not everybody wants a hug. We don't assume that people want to be touched. Maybe that's part of the pain, and maybe that's part of something that's not safe in their nervous system. So I love that you lead with your story, with your own vulnerability, and you say the things out loud. You say crying is fine, your physical expression of grief is fine, like, not just fine, welcomed, right? And everything else is consent-based. And that is so important because the sense of safety is not determined by a person saying, "This is a safe space." It's determined by that dynamic that you create, the permissions that you allow, and the agreement as a group. I think that is so important, and safety is not up to the person leading the event. Like, I don't get to define it just because Nina said, "This is safe." I would love for you to chime in on that.
I love that you said that. I think it's something that we see a lot in the queer world, that people saying, "I'm an ally." It's like, you're not actually an ally unless you're a safe person, and I can identify you as such. And that's a very interesting thing. And same in the world of sexual abuse survivors or domestic violence survivors. Just because you say, "I'm safe," doesn't make you safe. So what makes you feel safe in the programs that I teach is that over and over and over again, I am confirming that this is a place you can talk about whatever comes up. There are so many rules and boundaries that it helps people to feel safe. One of the boundaries is when someone's sharing about their work, there's no crosstalk, there's no interrupting, there's no questioning. We just listen and that's it. And even with groups, I have, one group in particular, I've been working with them for, like, 4 years ongoing, and even though some of them have been in it for such a long time, at the end of their share, I still say, "Would you like our reflections?" And because if they don't say that, then we're not going to give our reflections. Sometimes when you have shared something from this very vulnerable place, it's too much to hear from other people about how it affected them. You don't want to have to hold anything more. Like, it was enough to be witnessed and held, and then you're done. And I give that space to people over and over. I repeat it all the time. And I've gotten feedback from my clients that that is why they feel safe, that in other spaces they don't feel safe because it's not held with that really clear boundary. And I will say the people who have trouble with boundaries have trouble in my programs because they don't want to have those boundaries. That feels like shutting them down. I want to be able to say whatever I want to say. And I have rules about how we respond to people, how we reflect to people that keeps it. I mean, it sounds really controlled, and it's not. I'm teaching people how to be in a space with each other in a way that is safe and judgment free. And also, for example, when you're reflecting on someone else's work, one of the boundaries is it's not a time for you to talk about your own story. We're talking about this other person. It's their share, it's their work, it's their story. I know you have stories you want to talk about. That's not the time to do it. And it's hard for people. It's hard to hold back. It's hard to edit yourself, but I'm just really, really clear with everyone. And it's hard for people sometimes, but it also creates that really safe container.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for that. It is really hard because there's people that think they need to be agreeable. Like, yes, Susie, what you said was fantastic. And I resonate with it so much. When somebody is being vulnerable, that could feel threatening. That could feel incredibly discomforting. When somebody shares something very profound with you, sometimes thank you for sharing that is enough. That's
Often
it.
that's all we do. Yeah.
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 That's it. Thank you. If you could share maybe a breakthrough that somebody's had in one of your either one-on-ones or the groups without obviously divulging any personal details, maybe a story that is memorable that has come out of some of those sessions.
Well, one of the programs that I teach repeatedly is called the Geography of Grief, and it is a 10-week grief deep dive. And it's open to anyone who has any grief. It can be recent, it can be old, it doesn't have to be about losing a person, be anything. And it's such a open, safe container that people feel the power to uh, really release whatever it is they're holding. So I'm going to share a couple different stories, but one in particular was someone who her husband had been diagnosed with a rare kind of cancer. They'd been together 30 years, they had adult children, and he refused to process the the fact that he was going to die. I think at the beginning that wasn't clear, but at a certain point it became clear that that's what was happening, and he refused to let his wife and himself have any conversation that had to do with the fact that he was going to die. And so she was not allowed to process any of her grief around him, the anticipatory grief. And it was very hard to help him because he just wanted to talk about only the positive things. And he was doing all of these different protocols and trials, and it was very painful and difficult. And so when he did die, they had never talked about that he was going to die. And so she didn't get to say goodbye to him. She didn't get to do any of that. That a lot of people going through that, a similar kind of story, would have had something they could some moment where they could have done that processing. So when he died, she had been so shut down, like a tight rock of emotion and sadness, that she sort of went a little wild in how she lived her life for a little while. When she came to me, she just felt like, I don't even know what I'm feeling. And what she needed to process first, actually, was her anger at her husband for doing his death the way he did, which is so uncomfortable. I mean, who wants to do that, right? She knows that she loved him for all those years, and what she was left with was so much resentment and anger because of how he insisted on doing this. And It's his life. I guess he got to do what he wanted to do. It just was she was left with this very, very hard stuff. Plus, she was helping her children grieve, so she didn't do any of her own work. So when she first came to me and did this program, her first pass through was like anger. She had to get a lot of anger out. And so her first several weeks of the class was just releasing anger. But once she did, then she got to feel love, grief, sadness, loss, and then ultimately hope for her future. And so it was a really powerful journey that she went on that we witnessed her.
That was a really, really powerful story. Thank you for that. I see a spouse that was respecting her husband's wishes,
Yes.
and so there's that level of we also want to be mindful and respectful of what that person wants. And also, it's okay to feel this anger because, in a sense, she was robbed of the experience of processing this, and all of that comes out. What would you say to somebody about the anger, maybe even guilt that people feel afterwards with processing their emotions?
I just tell people there's no rule about what you're allowed to feel. Like if you feel guilt, if you feel grief, resentment, all of those things, I want to invite you to explore it, not to edit yourself, not to tell yourself I'm not allowed to. This is a space where we invite it in because the harder you try to not address it, the harder it's gonna keep knocking on the door wanting in. It doesn't go away, and so but if you can acknowledge it and process it, be curious about it, make something with it, then you can release it, and that's all it's really asking for is to be acknowledged, and then you get to do that. You get to just let it go through. It doesn't mean it won't come back, you'll be reminded of things, but it's such a cathartic experience to allow in these really uncomfortable feelings and create like a visual piece that just really it's like a portrait of it and look at it and say, "Oh, yeah, that is exactly what it feels like. It's horrible." And I put it on the paper and I get to let it go, you know? It's powerful, very powerful.
It reminds me in a sense of the journey your family went through collectively to get to the point where in your wedding last year, they were all present with you in your joy because it sounds like everybody leaned in one way or another to their truth. Whatever mixed emotions they were feeling initially, whatever acceptance they had to do. I always say that that famous quote, "The future is not what it used to be." Grief redefines what our sense of what we thought life would be. And so that redefining in every sense of the word, when we lean into it, we could get to a beautiful place, but it takes time and then it takes that willingness to go there. So it sounds like that's what she did in your program.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was very really beautiful to watch her move through that space. And the other story I wanted to share was that one of my clients who came to one of these grief and geography of grief programs, her husband had died like 13 years before, and they'd been on a vacation, and she'd brought home the suitcase and never unpacked it. And when she came to me, she said, "I have this suitcase. I'm moving and I have to deal with this." And I first of all just honored like I mean there was no judgment like I'm never going to be someone who would say, "Oh, I can't believe that you didn't take care of this" or something. I just said, "I think this is the perfect opportunity for you to do something with it. We can all be there in real time if you would like, and you can unpack it, like literally unpack it, and it's also metaphorically unpack it with us there. What she chose to do ultimately actually was she did unpack it and she took a picture of every single thing that was in it and then put that in an art journal page and then shared it with us. It was like a ritual. She turned it into this honoring of her husband ritual that was a creative act. And it was really powerful that she finally felt like she was in a place where she could do it while she was in this program.
Another beautiful example. And thank you for saying that one in particular because there are people, especially in that first, second year of grief, that think, I still have their shoes or their stuff or, pictures or whatever. I haven't been able to let go. And I just want to offer that there is no timing unless there's a pending sale of a home. There's no set timing for when you need to release items or if you need to release items. It is very personal and there are many ways to do it. I love that this person chose to make a ceremony out of it, a ritual. But 13 years, I want to highlight that because 13 years sounds like an eternity to some people. I have heard of people holding on to things for 30 years, and 6 years in, we still have my brother's stuff. Like, I don't really plan on letting it go anytime soon, and that's perfectly okay. It's because that is our timing. So, if you're listening, if you're watching, and you're feeling like, "I still haven't let go of the suitcase, I still have their shirt, I still have their stuff," that's okay, as long as it's not an impediment on your lifestyle, on your health, as long as it's not causing some other form of harm. If it's just a matter of choice, it's completely fine. So we want to validate this for you. And Susie, if somebody is resonating with everything that you're saying and they are just so excited to work with you and be a part of the magic that is your events and your one-on-ones, how can they do that?
The first thing would be to set up a discovery call with me. So just go to my website, which is susiestonefield.com or unfoldart.com. Both get you there. Click the discovery call button and book a call because it's really talk about witnessing. You get to tell me your story, and I take copious notes, and I'm a great listener. You really get to experience what it's like to be heard. And feedback I've gotten about those calls is that it helps people to share all these details of their story. We dig in. You know, you may tell me a bit of your story and I'll ask you for more information. Like, let's go back a little ways. Let's go back to childhood. Tell me a little bit about that. Just hearing back, when I reflect back to you what I've heard, you get to witness yourself, your own story. So that's very transformative, actually. But that's a great place to start. If you want to do the geography of grief or you would like to work with me one on one, then we will talk about whether that either it feels like a good fit for you. And my next geography of grief is going to start this June. So I'll be running it from June through August. It's online, so you can join it from anywhere you are. And I do generally have somewhat of an international community as long as the time frame works for people. And then I have a lot of other free and low priced options on my website if you're interested, videos and things like that. And in your show notes, there will be a link to a little workbook I've created for your listeners that are grief and creativity prompts with a li- li- like very simple list of art supplies that you need to gather to do it, and that's a great place to start. So I would get on my email list, book a discovery call. I take one-on-one clients all year long. And let me just say that the one-on-one work, like if you're wondering, well, why would I want to do one-on-one versus be in a group situation? And I would say that when you work one-on-one, you get to be so responsive to whatever it is, whatever your story is and where you are in it. And for some people, what they're exploring is just more private than something they want to have to talk about in a group situation. And that's completely wonderful, acceptable that you want to honor yourself that way rather than just say, no, I can't work with this at all. For people who are in a group situation, they tend to be people who are a a little bit farther out from their grief. Like it's not so fresh, because when it's so fresh, it's really hard to want to stay with the discomfort of your emotions. And I would say give yourself a little time and come back. Um, but folks in my group, any grief that you're experiencing, that's a great place to come in.
You already know it's in the show notes, and you can get started today with the list that Susie will provide with the workbook and the prompts, and then book that one on one. Even in my own grief journey, it was scary to, especially doing it that first time, like, what do I say? And, how much do I want to disclose and all the things. You will be guided through this process. Susie will create a sense of safety and comfort and honor your own path. So run to the show notes. And Susie, we're getting to the end here, but I do want to get your perspective on grief. As we discussed, is not just death related. It's not just personal identity loss. It's also collective. And boy, are we experiencing some interesting times collectively. It feels hard politically, socially, all the things. How can we shine a light on these dark times, in your opinion?
Ugh, such a good question. And I feel like I am just right there with you, in my own grief about what's happening in our world and how heavy the world is right now, and life here in this country. So there are 2 things that I am doing for myself that I recommend for everyone. One is make art that is your own protest, your own expression of your outrage, your emotions, what you're seeing, how you're feeling. It feels really good, and, it feels empowering to do that. And the other thing is have fun with art supplies. Be a kid, play, make a mess, use beautiful colors that bring you joy. Look for, I don't know, look for classes that feel like, oh, that would be fun and distracting. And in fact, distract yourself from what is going on. It doesn't mean that you're being irresponsible or you're not doing what you need to do, showing up. I'm sure you're showing up in exactly the way you need to, but you also have to take care of your nervous system. And one way to do that is to have joy. And I think, for me at least, dancing, singing, and making art with beautiful colors is that.
Leaning into joy helps us get through the hard times, especially, and it just really recharges us and refuels us. And you said singing. Do you sing? I'm so curious.
Do actually. I am a singer. I'm a song leader. And one of the things I do, so I do 2 main things with my song leading, and I've been song leading for, gosh, over 40 years with my guitar. I, sing at my synagogue, so I sing Jewish music as my prayer. That's my way through, and I love song leading there and lead services and things. And then the other thing I do is I'm the lead song leader at a camp, a family camp that's once a year for families with brain cancer, a brain cancer diagnosis in one of the parents. And so this is a camp where I'm the head of the music team. We have a band called Susie Squid and the Krabby Daddies.
Amazing. I will link that too if you have some links.
Yes, I will. It's called Milton
Yeah.
Marks Family Camp. And we create the container of music and joy. We create the situation so that they can cry and laugh and sing and do it in community and with people who really get how they're feeling. It's really the most amazing group of people. So yeah, that's a whole other podcast. Honestly, we could talk about it, but I love that work, and singing is a big part of my joy.
I'm so glad. I feel like I just discovered something so
You did.
thank you for sharing that, and absolutely, like, singing, dancing, joy, it's all part of the process. It's not mutually exclusive just because we're going through hard times. I think it would be especially because we're going through hard times to lean into this. So, thank you, Susie, for everything that you just shared, your wisdom. your techniques and all the topics that we talked about. And before we close the conversation, I want to give you the floor to share maybe something that you want to include in the conversation that we haven't touched on, or any reminders before we close. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I would just say everything we talked about was right, was just what I wanted to say and couldn't well, I guess what I would say is invite it in. Whatever you're feeling, let it be. Just like when grief showed up on that drive to the studio that night and it sat in the passenger seat while I cried and drove, um, invite it in. And you will feel better ultimately, I think, if you let yourself be with it, do something with it, and then release it.
Beautifully stated. Final question. What would Susie today say to Susie right before she decided to come out to her family?
You never know where the mess will take you.
I love it. I love it, love it. Thank you so much, Susie. It's been an absolute honor. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for being you.
Thank you, Nina.
That's it for today's episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Grief and Light podcast. I'd also love to connect with you and hear your thoughts and your stories. Feel free to share them with me via my Instagram page at Grief and Light, or you can also visit griefandlight.com for more information and updates. Thank you so much for being here, for being you, and always remember, you are not alone.